Okay, so hi guys, this is finally the most awaited session you guys are wanting for critical reasoning. I will not be covering every single thing. I'll be just going through strategies, going through basics. And so firstly, what do you know to be prepared for CLAT? You have 6 main topics: statement assumption, statement conclusion, inferences, syllogisms, strong and weak arguments, cause and effect. Almost all the probable and most relevant questions, again, remember what I'm saying most relevant, will be asked from these 6 directly. If not, the passage will definitely use either of these 6. So you need to know these 6 without fail if you want to crack the critical reasoning section of CLAT. So firstly, what is an argument? Any passage you're going to get is definitely going to have certain arguments, which will consist mainly of premises explicitly stated in the passage, which is basically your statements, your facts, evidence, all of that. Your conclusion, which is basically what the author intended when he was writing the passage. So that's the explicitly stated stuff. Implicitly, you're going to have assumptions, which won't be mentioned in the passage. Now, the types of arguments and the types of passages you get, this goes for both CLAT and AILET. One is argument by example. So by example means, for example, if India should elect a female prime minister because the New Zealand government has a female prime minister and that government is very efficient. So that's an argument by example. Argument by analogy. Now, an analogy is an inference based on resemblance from particular things, events, etc., to basically, again, derive a further resemblance. All right. So if I say that the yellow house beat the blue house in athletics and academics, they will also beat the blue house in performing arts. So that's by analogy. Now, causal arguments, which is basically arguments by cause. So if I say that she will have to withdraw from the football match on Saturday because she has broken her leg, that's an argument when I'm stating a cause. A salesman's argument is basically when the author gives certain advantages and disadvantages for his proposition. So if I say that smoking causes several diseases and therefore it should be banned, that's by stating disadvantages of smoking, therefore I want a ban. Arguments based on chronology are, for example, the iPhone 10 is better than the iPhone 6 because it was released later. So that is based on the chronology of events. Arguments by negation. An example for this would be he will not achieve the sales target because it's impossible. So I'm basically negating every possibility of an event to happen. Arguments by trapping questions are very rare, not usually asked. But again, an example for this would be, if I tell you X reason, will you accept it as true or false? So I'm asking a question. Usually, very rarely, authors or these kind of passages are presented in CLAT because, again, there's usually no very valid conclusion over there. So this is something which you will not encounter, but just still stating it for benefit. Arguments by challenge. He will not achieve the sales target, accept it or prove me wrong. That's basically reinstating a challenge. Now, I'm going to take this example passage and I'm going to show you where the assumption lies, where the conclusion is. All right. So Mr. Lal says we should adopt a national family policy that includes legislation requiring employers to provide paid parental leave and establishing government-sponsored daycare. Such laws would decrease the stress levels of employees who have responsibility for small children. Thus, such laws would lead to happier, better adjusted families. So the assumption over here is stress levels of employees who have small children are affected by paid parental leave and establishing government-sponsored daycare, mostly in a positive way. All right. The conclusion is happier, better, well-adjusted families would be caused by these laws. So if you notice over here, I've highlighted thus, and I'm going to tell you when I explain conclusion why this is important. So this is just an example passage I've stated. Now, firstly, let's start with assumptions. An assumption is basically the gap in logic. Now, you need to understand that, for example, if I am solving a math equation, all right, and I solve it and come to x squared is equal to 16, and then I write the answer is plus 4 or minus 4. Now, here I'm making the assumption that the person who's going to read this solution knows that the square root of 16 is plus 4 or minus 4. All right. So basically, the author assumes that whoever's going to read this already knows certain information. Understand this. Assumptions are never explicitly stated in the passage. Before I sit down to write down an article, I have certain assumptions in my mind that people already know this. All right. So if I just say that Article 14, blah, 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 I assume that people know at least something about Article 14 of the Indian Constitution. So a sample over here is, Philosophy should be taught to students at a very early age. It will instill in them a healthy skepticism towards values that they might otherwise accept without question. So one assumption over here is, even at an early age, students will be able to understand philosophical concepts. Okay, that's assumption one. Assumption two would be, it is a good idea for students to question traditional values. All right. Because if you look at the passage, it's saying that it will instill in them a healthy skepticism. So the author wants it. So that's why the author prefers that, okay, I want students to question traditional values, and therefore philosophy is important. These are two assumptions you could have. So again, another example is a passage can have multiple assumptions. It's not necessary that there will be only one assumption. Now, how do you not mess up these type of questions? One, you need to realize this: your personal opinion does not matter. All right. So you don't bring in your own personal bias into it. Only consider what's given in the facts. What can you derive from the facts, and what is the assumption the author has made? Second, do not make unwarranted assumptions. You can use common sense, but don't assume things that may not always be common knowledge. Now, again, there's one question that's going to come in your mind is, what is common sense, what is not? So common sense or common assumptions which are valid in most passages will be, humans need oxygen to breathe. The sun is visible during the day. Now, this is something which is common sense. I don't need the author to tell me that, or it's not going to be an answer to any question. All right. So don't make any assumption beyond that. All right. If there is an assumption that you make that, okay, everyone knows the periodic table by heart, that is a very unwarranted assumption. That's not true. That's not common knowledge. That's not common sense. Third, restatement of premises is not an assumption. Just because I rephrase what I was given in the passage, that is not an assumption. You are just rephrasing it. Again, understand this, a lot of options which CLAT gives, okay, a lot of them are basically, the way they try to trap aspirants is by stating the premises again. So don't fall for it. Third, fourth, aversion of premises is not an assumption. Now, what do I mean by aversion? Let's say the statement is, smoking is injurious to health, all right? And assumption one given in the question is, non-smoking promotes better health. This is an invalid assumption, all right? Just because smoking is injurious to health doesn't mean that people who do not smoke are healthy, all right? So don't take that as an assumption at all. Fifth, inferences are not assumptions, all right? Understand the difference. Assumption, based on assumption, you will write a premise. Based on premises, you will draw inferences. This is the chronology you need to follow, all right? So there is a vast difference. Inferences are reading between the lines. Assumptions occur even before the lines have been written. Sixth, conversion of premises is not an assumption. So when I mean conversion, I mean, for example, my statement is, some scientists harm society by presenting incomplete information. And let's say the question is, this assumption, some of those people who present incomplete information are scientists. Is this assumption valid or not? It's not, because you're basically just converting the premises, you're rephrasing certain clauses of a sentence and you're presenting it as an assumption. That is not the case. Assumptions are not usually exclusive. So a lot of you have asked me this, what about those options which are either of them is implicit? Most cases, the assumptions given will not be mutually exclusive. So you can sort of ignore that option. It doesn't happen in all questions. Certain questions may be tricky enough, but most of the time it doesn't happen. And eighth is eliminate with short choices. So elimination is the key to critical reasoning. And assumptions, you can just, even if you don't get all, let's say if you have like 3 assumptions given and the options are 1 or 2 are correct, 2 is correct, blah, blah, blah. Let's say you are sure the second statement given is the correct assumption. You know that's valid. You're not sure about 3. You think 1 is not an assumption. Just play with that option, play with option 2 or play with the statement 2. You know statement 2 is correct. Eliminate the options which are not falling in that category, all right? That is one, these are the 8 tips which I feel that will help you ace assumptions easily. Now, conclusions, all right? The conclusion basically is why the author has written a passage, all right? Now, if I ask you a very simple question, why in the world did the author write this passage? You tell me, okay, Tanisha, write a passage based on national law universities, all right? So I will write a passage based on certain objective in mind, all right? Okay, I'm going to write a passage on NLUs because I want to inform people about NLUs. I'm going to write a passage on NLUs because I want to show the great standard of education over here. So there's a particular purpose why an author will sit down to write a passage. You need to find that. All right, you need to find why the author wrote it. What is he trying to conclude? If you can answer that, believe me, you will find out everything else. So for taking the same example, philosophy should be taught to students at a very early age, to instill in them, blah, blah, blah. The conclusion over here, why that author wrote it, is because he believes that philosophy will help in instilling a healthy skepticism towards values in students. That's his purpose of writing. That is the conclusion over here. Now, again, how do you not mess up these type of questions? There are two main conditions for a conclusion. One, it has to be logically derived from the information given. Two, must not be inferred. All right. When I mean inferred, again, it's not reading between the lines. It's the next logical step. It's the main purpose of the passage. Conclusions are always explicitly stated, and that's why I'm going to give you a list of keywords over here. Therefore, thus, consequently, hence, which shows that, which suggests that, all of these are keywords often used to signal a conclusion. So let's say you read a passage, you have no idea what's it about, you don't understand what they're trying to tell you, etc., etc. You can sort of look for these keywords and then find out what the passage is about, what the main conclusion is. If you don't find it, what do you do then? You basically find one sentence which encompasses, the main gist of the passage, and just think to yourself, okay, if I add therefore to this sentence, will it form a very explicitly stated conclusion? Where does it fit appropriately? All of that. If you can figure that out within a few seconds, you will be able to identify the conclusion correctly. So I'm going to take a passage over here. Generally, marine biologists enter their field with the goal of doing important new research. They expect their colleagues to have similar goals. Therefore, when any marine biologist becomes a household name in the field of documentary nature films, most other scientists conclude that this biologist should no longer be regarded as a true colleague. So over here, therefore, states and points you in that direction where the conclusion is stated. That when marine biologists become a household name, most other scientists do not regard that person as a true colleague. That's the main conclusion of the passage. Now, this is a passage which, if you go through it, is a little tricky. So I'm going to read it out again. In his seminal work, Republic, Plato introduces the concept of philosopher king to describe an ideal ruler. Simply put, Plato's philosopher king would examine not only the issue at hand, but also its root causes and implications before solving it. This means that philosopher king derives pleasure not from the pursuit of power, but from the pursuit of understanding. They love true knowledge and not mere experience or education. As the Greek philosopher himself puts it, true pilot must of necessity pay attention to the seasons, the heavens, the stars, the winds, and everything proper to the craft if he is really to rule a ship. Most contemporary leaders claim to work for the common good, guided by some deep ideology. But ultimately, their lives are organized around the pursuit of power. Plato's ideal ruler wouldn't desire power, and thus couldn't be corrupted by it. The trappings of power mean nothing to him except insofar as they help him in the chosen task of governing. Now, you read this once and you're confused, all right? I think most of you are. I was confused when I read it for the first time. It's a lot of information to handle. So what do you exactly do? Now, I understand that what I can get from the first reading is Plato talks about something called philosopher king, and he talks something about power and understanding. So if you look over here, there's a keyword. This means that philosopher king derives pleasure not from the pursuit of power, but from pursuit of understanding. So I can assume that, okay, this is basically why the author wrote this passage, to show that this concept of Plato talks about understanding and not power. So the question over here, which of the following appropriately describes the author's conclusion? A, Plato's philosopher king would examine the root cause and implication of an issue before solving it. B, Plato's ideal rule is not relevant to today's time. C, most leaders of today are guided by some deep ideology instead of working for the common good of the people. D, unlike today's leaders, Plato's philosopher king is not driven by the pursuit of power, but from the pursuit of understanding. All right. Now, if I look at option A, it seems like the conclusion, but if you look back at the passage, if you look over here, he talks this second line, would examine not only the issue at hand, but also its root cause and implication before solving it. So this is one of the premises given. It's not exactly the conclusion. So I'm going to put this option aside. B, Plato's ideal rule is not relevant in today's time. This is nowhere mentioned in this passage. All right. So it's basically beyond its scope. C, most leaders of today are guided by some deep ideology instead of working for the common good of people. Now, this is a valid premise. It's mentioned in the passage, but it's not the main reason why the author wrote it, right? So D, unlike today's leader, Plato's philosopher king is not driven by the pursuit of power, but from the pursuit of understanding. Now I go back and I see this means that. I see this keyword of mine, and I know that this is the main reason why he wrote it. And he also talks about other rulers. He talks about contemporary leaders. So therefore, D is the correct option because it's the most comprehensive way of stating the conclusion. And it's the only correct answer. Now, going to inferences. So, a often question asked is a conclusion the same as inferences? All right, there's a difference. An inference is something that uses facts to determine other facts. So basically, inferences, as I stated earlier, it's basically reading between the lines, reading what the author did not explicitly state. So an inference will never be explicitly mentioned. All right. Now, let's take a sample. An easy willingness to tell funny stories or joke about oneself is a mandatory mark of supreme self-confidence. This willingness, often not acquired until late in life, is even more revealing than his good nature, acquiescence in having others poke fun at one. All right. So, what would be a valid inference over here? Now, if you look over here, this person says that a willingness to tell funny stories about oneself is a mandatory mark of supreme self-confidence. He uses the word mandatory. So a correct inference over here would be a person who lacks self-confidence will enjoy neither telling nor will enjoy neither telling nor hearing funny stories about himself or herself. So someone who doesn't like to tell funny stories will not enjoy telling one, will not enjoy hearing one. That's the valid inference you can make from this passage. So I cannot say that if I am funny, I enjoy this blah blah blah. That's explicitly stated in the passage, and that's not a valid inference. Now, how do you again not mess up these type of questions? One, again, as I said earlier, never explicitly mentioned. You have to read between the lines. If you're a good reader, if you are a bibliophile, you will be accustomed to reading between the lines and making inferences, and therefore these type of questions will be easier for you. Now, again, a common mistake which people make is you see 4 options, okay, and you see one option which is not really related to the central idea of the passage. All right, so people tend to ignore that option because they feel that yeah, ye to theme se related hi nahi hai. This is not related to the theme, so why should I mark it? Understand this, inferences are basically just deriving from 2-3 statements given the passage. Those statements can be directly related to the main idea or may not be related to the theme. Inferences can also be illogical or inaccurate. So don't look at an inference based on what your logic tells you or based on what your accuracy based on what your accuracy of facts tells you. Inferences are usually very specific. As I said over here in the last passage, mandatory was a keyword for me to come to a valid inference. So look at keywords and understand that your inferences have to be very specific. So again, conclusions will always be about the central idea. Inferences may or may not be related to the central idea. Now, a common question which comes over here is, you have types of questions, especially in AILET, that, you know, this inference is definitely true or this is probably true. Now, sometimes you look at facts and you find that, okay, something is very explicitly stated. From there, you derive something. All right, you derive an inference. Now, if the inference does not directly derive from the statements in the passage, you've obviously assumed something extra. You made it some extra assumption based on your common knowledge, based on your knowledge of the facts given elsewhere in the passage. All right. So if you believe that extra assumption you made, is it universally true and can it never be false? Then your inference is definitely true. Otherwise, it's probably true that, okay, maybe if this assumption of mine which I've made, extra assumption of mine which I've made, if it is valid, in most cases, it will probably be true. Same for definitely false. If I make an inference, if the opposite of that inference is not derived directly, and if I made an extra assumption for the same, will that extra assumption be universally true? Will there be any fact which will disprove it? Can it never be false? Then it's definitely false or it's probably false. Now, one thing which you get all the time is data inadequate. When is the data inadequate and when is it probably true? So if, again, I talked about that extra assumption, right? That extra assumption, if you make an extra assumption and then also you don't come to a concrete conclusion, you're unable to derive a proper inference, then the data is inadequate. So then you can mark option D, none of the above, or data inadequate for that question. If it is not, it's definitely probably true or it's probably false. Now, steps to follow for solving inferences. Check if you can only evaluate and derive an inference based on whatever is given in the passage. All right. Check if you made an inference and if that is supported or contradicted by something in the passage. All right. If you cannot derive it, you can, take some additional justifiable or universally acceptable assumptions. Again, universally acceptable matlab kya? Sun is seen only in the day. Humans need oxygen to breathe. Blah blah blah. These things can be taken as extra assumptions. Otherwise, nothing else. Or additional justifiable basically means that if it is justified somewhere else in the passage, if one other sentence given in the passage justifies my assumption, then I can take it as a valid assumption. That's all you need to know. Now, syllogisms. Syllogisms are basically a sort of a quantifiable way of making inferences. You have 4 main types of questions you're going to get. One is all SRP. All SRP is a type over here. Some SRP, most, few, mostly. All these other words can be used in place of some. Universally negative, no SRP, so no, one of them, none, not a single, all of that. Some S or not P. So this is, over here, a word which you usually use is seldom SP, whatever, but not often used. Okay, all SRP. So basically, self-explanatory, this is the only condition, only case you're gonna have. No SRP again, pretty self-explanatory, this is the only case you're gonna have. Now, this one, a lot of you just make case 1 on your left and you don't do the other 2. Some SRP can be the middle part over here in the one on your left. The one in the middle, I can take all those which belong to group S and are part of group P. Okay. Same for the case on your right. Some SRP, the ones in the inner circle. These are 3 cases you have. Now understand this. Whenever you get a syllogism and you get certain statements to prove or disprove, you have to make all the possible cases you have. Any possible cases which will be fulfilled by the given conditions, they will, if you can make as many cases, make as many as you can. And if one of them is not proven, if one of them is contradicted by any other statement, that case, that entire statement is invalid. Okay, so make as many cases as you can, and this will you'll only be able to accomplish when you practice more syllogisms. Some S or not P, same case over here. Some S or not P, the part which does not come in the inner circle, and 2 separate circles. That's what you can do. Now, syllogisms, I prefer Venn diagrams. A lot of people do it without Venn diagrams, but that requires a lot of practice, usually not reliable. Venn diagrams is the most efficient way of doing it, so I would advise you to do it that way. Again, if one probability is disproved, the entire option will be negated. Believe me, honestly, syllogisms are the most easy part of it. They are way easier than passages. You should be grateful and really lucky if you get a lot of syllogisms in your CLAT exam. So don't overthink it. Don't think over an option for too long. If you feel you're not going to make any valid case, any valid probability, just skip that question, honestly. Now, strong and weak arguments, okay? So there are 8 types which I would say are usually what they ask for strong arguments. Any strong argument is basically something which makes a statement more valuable, okay? Now, for beyond that, you have experienced truth. So experienced truths are sort of like established facts. Now, if I say, should people prefer vegetarian food to non-vegetarian food? Okay. Now, argument 1 of mine is, no, non-vegetarian food has more protein. This is an experienced truth and established fact. So it's a strong argument. All right. Analyzed truth is basically, where proper logic over here. Again, the same thing. Can take over government policy decisions, fundamental rights. Again, an analyzed truth based on certain facts and evidence. If I give you that, okay, in this survey, blah, blah happened. So it's analyzed truth. A universal truth, same thing as I said earlier, humans need oxygen to breathe, sun shines, all of that universally acceptable statements, universal truths. 5, a commonly accepted truth. Now, people genuinely want to side with good stuff, good things which are commonly accepted. Again, a continuation of the previous cases. A positive statement. Now, I've taken the same example. Should vegetarian food be preferred over non-vegetarian food? No, non-vegetarian food has more protein. That is a part of experienced truth. A positive statement would be if I say that vegetarian food contributes to better health. Okay, over here, that would be a positive statement. I'm basically stating a very positive aspect of my argument. Look at strong arguments, look at strong and weak arguments as if you have 2 secretaries coming to you and telling you each argument. So if I have one person saying that, okay, take non-veg food, another person saying veg food, you're going to ask your secretaries why. So do it based on that. Now, bans. You get a lot of questions based on, okay, should smoking be banned? Should alcohol be banned? If I say, okay, yes, alcohol should be banned, I need to give a reason showing the negative side of it. Yes, alcohol should be banned because it causes a lot of crime. It's a factor of a lot of crime. No, alcohol should not be banned because it's required as it is a huge economic commodity. So look at it that way. Always strong arguments if it talks about educational, infrastructural, national interests, defense, security of the nation, poverty, etc., etc. These are always strong arguments. Weak arguments. Now, comparison is the weakest argument. You need to understand this. A lot of people mark comparisons, like for example, the one I'd given at the starting of the session. India should have a female prime minister because the New Zealand government is led by a female prime minister and is more efficient. That is the weak argument. Why? Because just because it works in New Zealand or it works in some other part of the world doesn't mean it's going to work in India. So understand this, any comparison, any argument which talks about comparison is always weak. Second, if the cause is predicted because an effect has occurred. Now, if I say the cricket match has been abandoned, full stop, it must have rained. That is a weak argument. I'm basically stating the effect of something. Superfluous is something is very simple assertion that students should not have student council elections because it will lead to chaos. Very superfluous, very simple assertion. I'm not giving any concrete facts as to why it should not be why student council elections should not be allowed. Ambiguous. If an argument which is very ambiguous does not have any clear specific idea in it, is ambiguous, therefore a weak argument. Why not? If you have any question which gives you an argument that, okay, yes, it should be banned, why not? Or something like that. Okay, why not is the weakest argument of all. If the argument asks you a question in return, it's a weak argument. When I ask you a question, I want an answer. I don't want a counter question. Chronology unless elaborately detailed. Again, the same argument. iPhone 10 is better than the iPhone 6 because it will release later. That's a weak argument. But if I say that, okay, the iPhone 10 is better than the iPhone 6 because the iPhone 10 has better camera features, better RAM, blah, 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 then that's a strong argument. Keywords, only, all, must, blah, blah, blah. If I state something like, it should be banned because it always works like this. Weak argument because you're completely generalizing it. You're basically saying that this is the only way it's going to work. If it's a very narrow argument, it's weak. Personal opinion, no one cares about your opinion in the paper. Don't let it affect your way when you solve questions. And again, if any argument states a personal opinion of someone, it's not a strong argument. Logical inconsistency. So when the assumptions or conclusions in the particular passage are attacked by contradictory facts, weak argument. Or sometimes you have option which is like, the first part says yes, and the latter part which explains the reason says no. Or the second option is no, and the reason stated is a positive reason. So basically, these are logical inconsistent options, and therefore just strike them out. Don't even read the further part of it. Okay. How do you exactly go about these questions? Ways to strengthen an argument. If an answer choice usually is correct for an assumption question, it will be correct for a strengthening question as well. Works most of the times, again, depends on the passage. If an option can confirm the assumption by mentioning some evidence and helps the assumption appear to be true, it will strengthen the argument. So if I say that, okay, smoking should be banned because there was a survey conducted, a lot of people did wanted it banned or something like that, again, it will basically give me a strong argument to ban smoking. Ways to weaken an argument. Basically the converse of what I said earlier. You have to find an argument to disprove any assumption made. So therefore, the argument is weakened then. If I provide evidence which will show that the assumption will less likely be true or the premises stated will be contradicted, then it will be a weak argument. Now, cause and effect. So when you have cause and effect questions, you have basically 5 options you're going to get. Out of these 5, any 4 will be there. A is the effect and B is the immediate and principal cause. A is the immediate and principal cause, B is the effect. A is the effect, but B is not the dash dash dash. 4, B is the effect, but A is not the immediate and principal cause. 5, none of the above. Now, firstly, distinction between immediate and principal cause. An immediate cause is basically where there's a proximity of time between the cause and the event. Principal cause is the main reason why something has happened. So, for example, if I take the revolt of 1857, an immediate cause was the Enfield rifles, was because soldiers were being told to use those kind of cartridges. Immediate cause. Principal cause would be the doctrine of lapse, Lord Dalhousie's policies. Principal causes, the main reasons why Indians revolted against the British Raj. So if you understand this difference based on this example, you'll basically know what's an immediate cause, what's a principal cause. Very rarely will you have options telling you to distinguish between the two. Mostly these are kind of options you'll get. Now there's a particular flowchart I want you guys to follow for this. You start by basically seeing the two events happening, okay? First ask yourself the question, is one of the events occurring before the other? Yes, A occurs before B. Ask yourself if it's the immediate principal cause of B. Vice versa for the same. If you get it yes, then you go, and if the answer is yes, you go to option 2 or option 1. Option 2 or option 1, which is basically stating either of A or B as the immediate and principal cause and the other as the effect. If the answer is no, where you do not know if one of the events is definitely occurring before the other, if there's no connection, if there is no, it's 5. That none of the above. Okay, if it's yes, then you again ask yourself the same question, which of them is the immediate and principal cause, and then you go ahead. So if you follow this flowchart and use this as every rationale while attempting every cause and effect question, you'll basically 99% of the times you'll get it correct. Now next, this is basically sort of cheat codes I've made a lot, and sort of an easy way of going on critical reasoning. First, when you read a passage, okay, focus on the main idea. Why in the whole wide world did the author write the passage? Ask yourself that question, find the answer to that. Understand the connection of details. The author has written a passage. He's not dumped words from his head onto a sheet of paper. He's written a passage. There's obviously some link, some connection you need to establish. Determine the purpose of writing the author's opinion. You need to know, like if I tell the author to write about, again, NLUs, is the author pro NLUs? Is he against it? Does he have any reservations regarding the same? All of that. Elimination is a key. Evaluate the choices given. Eliminate the obviously wrong ones. Believe me, that's the best way you can solve critical reasoning. Every passage has a central idea, as I said earlier. You need to find that point. Find why the author wrote it. You have some background sentences, some extra information you need to understand that central idea. You'll have some support, will be basically evidence and examples, surveys, statistics. All of that would be coming under support for the central idea. Implications, basically end results derived from the main points and the conclusion for the same. Assumptions which the author used before writing the passage. That's all you will have in a passage. You need to just find out these. Even if, let's say, if you have a passage, like for example, the passage on Plato, okay? A lot of you may have not understood it and it's completely fine. You don't need to find the central idea for that. You just need to be able to shrewdly look at the options, evaluate them, and eliminate the ones you think are not necessary, and then find the correct answer. So go ahead with that. Okay, now main thing. A lot of people, they read passages as if they're doing it for the purpose of knowledge. Your purpose for reading that passage is not to gain knowledge. No one cares if you're going to learn more about Plato or philosophy after you finish the CLAT exam. You are writing it for the purpose of cracking the exam. You are a CLAT test taker, act like one. Be an active reader, okay? Don't read it as if it's a novel, as if it's something, you're going to read and just throw it away later on. You're reading for the purpose of solving questions. Actively read. Go through whatever. Because see, when you start actively reading, you won't zone out, okay? Unless it's a miserable passage. If it's a passage like financial related passages, which I found very tough. I did not really like them that much. So I would zone out often. But if I was an active reader, I would look, okay, this is the RBI, they said something, blah, blah, blah happened. This is the rate they had. So if you look at it that way and you read it for the purpose that, okay, I want to crack this exam. I'm going to read this passage and I have to answer 5 questions and I want 5 marks. Read it with that mindset. If you change your mindset, believe me, you will start zoning out less and you will increase your accuracy in critical reasoning. Third, the main reason why people are scared of critical reasoning, why they are confused between options is there is only one correct answer. Okay, a lot of people ignore this. They think that, there are 4 options. Option A might be correct, option B might be correct too, option D might be correct too. I have to choose the most appropriate. No, there is only one correct answer. Within a given passage and a given specific question, there is only one answer which is going to fit into that passage and into that question. You need to find that one correct answer. If you tell yourself that, I have to look for the most appropriate answer, you are never going to crack the exam. You are going to get every question wrong. You're going to spend your time pondering over answers, pondering over options, and you're going to lose time and marks in negative marking as well. Because I'll tell you why. The logic and the psychology behind this is, now I as an examiner, I have been told to make critical reasoning questions for the CLAT exam, all right? I take a passage. Let's say I take a passage on the Black Lives Matter movement, okay? And I ask a question, okay, which of these options talks about the author's conclusion. Okay, now I've written the passage, I know what the conclusion is, or even if I found it from the internet, I know that okay, this is the conclusion why the author wrote it. So I will have one option which will definitely be the correct answer. So that might be, Black Lives Matter movement has led to a political revolution, something like that. That is a conclusion. I have to make 3 incorrect options. I have to make 3 incorrect options just to put it in the paper to confuse aspirants. So I have to come up with them on my own. I won't be given that in an article on the newspaper, or when I write the passage, I won't be thinking of that. So for the examiner, he has to create 3 stupid, silly, obviously not correct answers. So understand that perspective, that the examiner is doing it for that perspective. He has only written 1 correct answer. Find that one out. Questions first or passage first? Usually questions first works most of the time. I found it very effective. I would initially do the passage first. But if you do questions first, you become an active reader. You only look out for those parts. So even if the questions are not talking about the central idea and only looking for certain inferences based on certain facts, I will look only for those sentences which talk about that, and then go ahead. The title, you have questions like, okay, which is the appropriate title for this passage? The title has to be evident of the central idea, always. The central idea is what runs through each and every paragraph of the passage. So the title is evident of the central idea. 6th, do not read out loud. If you read out loud, you're gonna be a slow reader, be a passive reader. You will not be actively reading. You will not be reading for the sake of finding out answers. You'll be reading for your own benefit, and that's what you do not want. Now, this is again a cheat code, which I would say most of the time this works. In very rare cases, it doesn't. Avoid options that use extreme words, only, all, always, ever, never. Usually, as I said, for weak arguments, it doesn't work. For assumptions also, it doesn't work. Out of context answers, which is beyond the scope of the passage. Choices with facts and evidence are distorted. If you find an option which is directly contradicting what is given in the passage, it's not the correct answer for any question. Choices make you judge or form your own opinions. If I give an option which makes you judge on your own that, okay, do I think smoking is morally correct or ethically correct, or is it not? That is not the correct answer. The examiner does not want you to think of your personal opinions. It's a CLAT aptitude test, not an exam of how great of a lawyer you are, or an ethics exam. Choices are illogical, outrageous, unscientific, or politically incorrect statements. Answers with religious, racial, and gender discrimination should be avoided. They will never give you anything which has any racial bias, any religious bias, any sexist or misogynist or misandrist option is never going to be the correct answer. It's just given for the sake of it. Okay? Choices that are true but assume something that is not mentioned in the passage. The ones which extra assumptions usually are not the correct answer. So if you find yourself constantly overthinking an option that, okay, if I assume this and then if I assume that, then the correct answer hoga, that's wrong. It's not the correct answer. Choices that cannot be backed by solid proof. Assertions should be backed by assertions or other examples. So you need to have solid proof for every option. You need to go back to the passage and see, okay, if I choose option D, this statement from the passage will support it, and therefore this is the correct answer. Understand this, every option given, the correct answer will always have something to back from the passage, something which will tell you, something from the passage will tell you that, listen, option C is the correct answer, mark it. So you need to find that out. Find out whichever option you choose has certain evidence for the same. Read only once. Make a 30-minute target every day to solve at least 5 to 6 sets. That will help you improve your speed. It will help you practice. And right now, with 1 month left to CLAT, you have to be timing yourself correctly. Now, this is basically something which works for the LSAT. I also tried it. It definitely works for the LSAT. It usually also works for CLAT as well. Now, in LSAT, you have 24 to 25 questions, all right? What I've noticed is, and I've noticed this in CLAT as well, when an examiner makes a paper, he keeps like the first 2-3 questions very easy. Okay, very easy. You look at those 2-3 questions and you're like, yaar, ye to logical reasoning section, ye to marks milenge mujhe. But then you look at the middle 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions, and then you see this question that these are tricky. These are long passages, twisted questions. A lot of options are the same. All of those kind of passages will make you lose time. All right, they'll be in the middle, and the last are the pretty easy ones. Why? Because examiners feel that people usually start attempting from the beginning or the end of the passage or the section, and therefore they psychologically put easy passages on either side. Usually this works definitely for LSAT. Sometimes works for CLAT too. I mean, I've seen my mock scores increase when I would do this. So what I basically do is solve the first 8 questions in case of LSAT, in case of CLAT 2-3 questions, then do the last 2-3 questions, and then do the passage in the middle. this usually helps you, because then what will happen is you'll do the passages which are easier, the passages which are usually gonna fetch you more marks. And if you don't have time, you're gonna miss out the middle passages, which are obviously going to be more difficult, more twisted answers, passages which are very difficult to comprehend. Those will be in the middle of the section. Usually works. Try it out for a few marks, and hopefully it'll increase the accuracy. Now, I know I gave a lot of strategies over here. Sometimes it will not work. Like I've had a lot of seniors give me certain strategies which never worked out for me. So don't generalize a method, okay? Don't completely say that, okay, whatever happens, I'm going to stick to this flowchart and this method of solving. Understand this, different passages, different questions will make you have to find different methods of solving. So be a little flexible with critical reasoning, and don't really stick to a strategy unless it works 99% of the time. Be prepared for yourself that, okay, maybe 1% will happen in the CLAT exam where this strategy of mine will not work and I will not have a conclusive answer. So you have to be flexible. You have to think on your feet for critical reasoning. It's called critical reasoning for a reason, that you have to be analytical and logical in your answers. Last but not the least, it's pretty doable. It's a very easy section. Practice more, you'll score more, and your accuracy will increase. Critical reasoning is that one section which, even if you're miserable at it, you will probably be able to score at least 4 or 5 more marks if you practice more, and you make your mindset as such that, listen, I can tackle this section. So yeah, that's about it.